There are around 5,000 chemicals inside of tobacco smoke, 70 of which are known to cause cancer and have been tried and tested inside of humans. Now, this is probably only scratching the surface, and these figures are bare minimum levels, and people simply don't understand and don't really have the technology to analyze what exactly is inside that specific cigarette smoke and vapor. But what's interesting is that all of these 5,000 chemicals, they will act differently in different quantities on the body when they are ingested versus when they are inhaled. Some things will act like a poison when they are inhaled, but some things will just be digested and ended up being excreted if they are like ingested orally. So that's why in this video I'm going to go through the certain effects that the chemicals in cigarette smoke actually have when they are inhaled rather than are ingested orally, because they will have different properties, they will do different things. For instance, when certain things are digested, it will go through your digestive system. If it's like a particularly potent poison, it will probably just kill you there and then. But if something is absorbed into your bloodstream, then it can do lots and lots and lots of other bad things. But it's very hard for a lot of chemicals to be absorbed inside of the bloodstream, inside of your lungs. The way gas exchange works is when you breathe in oxygen from the air, it goes into your lungs and then diffuses across a membrane into the bloodstream. Now, this membrane won't let as many sort of substances in as like your sort of intestines, as sort of your intestinal cells, because they need bigger substances to pass through. However, your lung cells, your capillaries, they only need oxygen to come through the cell membranes, and they only need carbon dioxide to come out. That is all that is pretty much required, and molecules at least on that size for gas exchange to actually occur. So it's going to be a lot harder for molecules to actually enter the bloodstream that way, which is why the things that occur inside of cigarette smoke, when you actually inhale it and it goes into your respiratory system, it will act differently compared to when you ingest it orally. Now, the first chemical that is commonly found inside of tobacco smoke, and this is probably the one that everyone would have heard of, is tar. Tar is a like sticky black liquid that is basically just free carbon and long hydrocarbons. It's a sticky black liquid. This means that it's going to be composed of very, very long hydrocarbon chains. These are 100% not going to be able to be absorbed into your bloodstream, and if they were, then it would be a massive issue. But that is essentially the thing that actually makes your lungs black. You would have seen all the images on the packets of cigarettes and stuff on the internet in general, where it's literally got like black lungs. That is essentially the tar. The tar causes that because it's a sticky black liquid that, while it isn't sticky and black when you actually smoke a cigarette and it ends up going into your lungs, because it's volatile, it's evaporated inside of the smoke, it will then condense inside your lungs and it will accumulate over time. You won't notice it every single cigarette you smoke. You're not going to notice that there is a significant buildup of tar after like 10 minutes or something. This stuff happens over time. But there are also a lot of other stuff that is contained inside of tar, which is mostly just comprised of carbon and hydrogen. Just simply put, hydrocarbon molecules. No other things. There will be a few other organic molecules, but the majority component of tar will be long hydrocarbon chains and a few other specific ones that I'm going to talk about now. Now, the first one is benzene. Benzene is a carbon ring. It's got 3 double bonds inside of it, which means it has the formula C6H6. Now, while benzene is commonly used inside of organic chemistry and chemical practicals in general, it is actually a very potent poison, and it is contained inside of the sort of tar mixture that has been evaporated, and you do end up inhaling when you smoke a cigarette, for instance. This is something that is probably small enough to be absorbed into the bloodstream from the alveoli at some point in time, and it will cause bone marrow damage, and is the most, the thing I got in my research was it's the most potent chemical that can cause myeloid leukemia, which is a certain type of cancer. Now, the second hydrocarbon that is contained inside of tar, other than the sort of big long chains, are things known as PAHs, which are polyaliphatic hydrocarbons. It's basically just a load of ringed molecules put like next to each other, and it's like built up in almost like a polymer sort of shape. These are pretty damaging. They won't end up getting into your bloodstream as much, but they can cause reproductive damage. They're just going to build up inside of your lungs. Imagine that kind of stuff just coating the cells and tissues of your lung. I've spoken before about how the lung cells of a smoker, they will adapt to sort of be able to deal with these aliphatic hydrocarbons, the hydrocarbons in general, the tar, all the chemicals that exist, they'll develop like a harder sort of coating so that it's harder for the substances to diffuse and enter the cells. But obviously it will still enter because your body's not going to be able to deal with this sort of man-made substance as efficiently as it can with the things that are found naturally inside of nature. Now, the second chemicals that are found inside of cigarette smoke are two chemicals known as formaldehyde and acetaldehyde. A formaldehyde is the simplest aldehyde that can exist inside of nature, and acetaldehyde is the 2-carbon equivalent of formaldehyde. It just has an extra carbon that has a few other hydrogens attached to it to saturate it. Now, these are both known carcinogens and are both found inside of cigarette smoke. They're both small enough to at least be absorbed into the bloodstream on some occasion, and even if they're not, then realistically it's going to do bad things to your lungs. It irritates just the lung cells in general. Even if it doesn't diffuse into the bloodstream, it will diffuse into just the general cells of your lung. That is also not good news because it will irritate those cells and cause lung damage, lung irritation and inflammation to just build up and continue and continue and continue. But even when it does get into the bloodstream, formaldehyde and acetaldehyde is also produced during the metabolism of ethanol, and it's a known carcinogen, which also means that ethanol can be categorized as a carcinogen as well. Now, acetaldehyde damages your DNA, it causes mutations, and that is the reason that it causes cancer. These are also quite bad chemicals for people that like accidentally, you may have heard of the term passive smoking, which is where you are essentially just around people that smoke and like have those chemicals in their vicinity. Formaldehyde, especially formaldehyde, will irritate just the general cells of your eyes, like your nose, your mouth and stuff, because they're quite sensitive areas. They're areas where these cells can get into the body. They will then diffuse into cells because it is quite a small molecule, and that means that it's going to irritate those cells just like it does inside of your lungs and causes cancer and stuff like that. It probably won't be as bad inside of here because your body has more defense mechanisms in this area as it is so exposed, but still, it's just not good for anyone to have to experience that pain in general. Now, the third category of things that are found inside of cigarette smoke are actually metals. Metals, while obviously in very small quantities and not clearly tangible inside of tobacco smoke, metals are found naturally inside of compounds in nature, and they are found inside of tobacco smoke because of the oxidation of some of the compounds that naturally exist inside of the tobacco, the heating and all that sort of stuff. Things like arsenic, which is used as a rat poison, chromium, which essentially amplifies the activity of the carcinogens that already exist inside of tobacco smoke. It sort of lets the carcinogens mutate the DNA, and unlike other minerals and other vitamins that would sort of stop that process and disarm these carcinogens, chromium is essentially the opposite and lets it do its thing, which obviously isn't very good for you. Now, cadmium is literally found inside of battery acid. That's the third metal, and if it's in batteries, then probably not something that you're going to want to be inhaling on a daily basis. That can kind of use a bit of common knowledge there as well. Now, the fourth chemical that is found inside of tobacco smoke is cyanide. Cyanide, I think, has the formula HCN. It's got an H bonded to a carbon, which is triple bonded to a nitrogen. Triple bonds, not the most stable thing in the world, hence why cyanide is an incredibly potent poison. While it's obviously not in enough quantities to immediately kill you, as I said, if it's ingested, it will do a lot of bad things and eventually be fatal. But when it's inhaled in the quantities that it is, it doesn't obviously immediately kill you because people live off the smoking for multiple years. But still, it damages the cells of your cilia, and it should give you an idea of the stuff that is contained. I mean, I guess there are foods in nature that contain cyanide. Apples contain cyanide, all that sort of stuff. But it is in such a little quantity that it is essentially meaningless. But that is when it's ingested in a trace amount. And when it is ingested in that amount, it can be dealt with and nothing bad really happens to you. But when it's inhaled, it's a whole different topic, which basically sort of separates the two things. You can't compare cyanide, how it acts when you inhale it, compared to how it acts when you ingest it, because it is two different systems inside of the body, and it will do like many different things inside of those two categories. Now, the fifth chemical that's found inside of tobacco smoke is carbon monoxide. This is also another one, a bit like tar, that you probably would have heard of inside of your school lessons. Carbon monoxide, it is an interesting molecule because normally you have carbon dioxide, but then somehow carbon monoxide exists, which leads to the question that how on earth is this molecule actually stable enough, because you may think that it's not going to be bonded enough to actually sort of exist naturally, but it uses something known as a dative covalent bond, which means that both molecules will end up having a full outer shell, which makes it more stable, but it's still not a good molecule because it is odorless, it's really hard to detect, and when it is absorbed inside of your lungs, it is small enough to get absorbed inside of the bloodstream. The O part of the CO is sort of, it's weird. The O part, your blood cells mistake it for oxygen. This means that CO will bind to your red blood cells. It will take it around the body, but the problem is it isn't oxygen, and your body needs oxygen to actually be able to function and do a lot of metabolic processes. So that's not going to have any good news. It's going to really ruin your just performance in general. And if you continue to do it, if you do it regularly, then that's going to be an incredibly hampering thing. But even when you just do it on the sort of occasion, it's not going to be good for you because it will just impact your performance on the days after, as your body is recovering from getting rid of that carbon monoxide, because it can't sort of just go off the red blood cell. It does just stay on there, and until that red blood cell dies, the specific place where the oxygen would have binded to essentially is rendered useless. So it's not just something that happens immediately. Your performance will be hampered and impacted for days, maybe even weeks to come. Now, the sixth compound that's found inside of tobacco smoke is nitrous oxides. This can be NO, NO2, NO3, any of these sort of nitrous oxides, and these are normally formed in car engines. Nitrogen from the air is generally very unreactive because it's triple bonded, it's got a strong bond, and it doesn't really need to react with anything else. However, when you put it under enough heat, the bonds will break and it will react to random other things and create a whole load of compounds, including nitrous oxides, because the heat, the oxidation of all that stuff will create those compounds. And now, nitrous oxides are the main pollutants found inside of car exhaust fumes. They're the main reason for air pollution. They're the main reason for deaths related to air pollution. And you're essentially just directly breathing that in every single time you smoke. And if you are doing that, you actually end up being worsely impacted than a random civilian who occasionally breathes in car fumes because they live in a city, because you're literally just doing it straight up. And it's essentially like you're doing that, but it's on steroids. Not going to end up being good for you whatsoever in the long term. Now, the seventh chemical that's found inside of tobacco smoke is ammonia. Ammonia is a weird compound. It's NH3. It's essentially a saturated nitrogen. Ammonia's got a very weird smell. If you sort of smell too much of it, if you inhale too much of it, it can make you faint, go dizzy, all that sort of stuff. Often if you're in some kind of science lab and stuff, the way that things go is if you want to smell some kind of compound, you just sort of waft it towards your nose so that you're not directly inhaling it. But yeah, sometimes that doesn't always go to plan, and you do end up inhaling a lot of ammonia and getting that really weird sort of minty almost smell inside of your nose. It's quite weird. But yeah, that is essentially, you won't smell it because when you're smoking, you don't you don't inhale it that way, but it just ends up going into your lungs because obviously your nose is connected to your esophagus. If you imagine it goes round up here, down into your neck, then it will go into your lungs, and because it's gas, so that's where all the gases go, then all the solids will go down into the stomach. But obviously ammonia is a gas at room temperature, so it's going to go into the lungs, it's going to just do loads of bad things. Ammonia is produced when amino acids are deaminated inside of the liver, and this has to be gone through the urea cycle to actually detoxify yourself in a way, but this obviously isn't going to happen when ammonia is roaming around the cells of your lungs. Yeah, just not entirely good news. That's about all I have. There are going to be 1,000 times more chemicals than what I've listed in this video. So just watch out, don't go along that path, and try to get out of it if you are currently stuck on that path, because it will pay so many dividends, not just for you, but for the people around you that you value a lot. But with that, I recommend subscribing because I like this community of young tribal people who are willing to improve themselves so much more than you already have, and good luck.